Tonight I have the pleasure of introducing Layla AlAmmar and Hala Alyan to discuss their new books, Silence is a Sense and The Arsonists City. They'll be in conversation with poet Jess Rizkallah. Layla AlAmmar is a writer and academic from Kuwait. She was the 2018 British Council International Writer-in-Residence at the Small Wonder Short Story Festival. Her debut novel, The Pact We Made, was published in 2019. She's written for The Guardian and Arab Lit Quarterly, and she is currently pursuing a PhD on the intersection of Arab women's fiction and literary trauma theory. Hala Alyan is the author of the novel Salt Houses, winner of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize and the Arab American Book Award, as well as 4 award-winning collections of poetry, most recently the 29th Year. Her work has been published by The New Yorker, the Academy of American Poets, Lit Hub, the New York Times Book Review, and Guernica. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband, where she works as a clinical psychologist. And tonight's moderator, Jess Rizkallah, is a Lebanese-American writer and illustrator. Her full-length collection, The Magic My Body Becomes, was a finalist for the Believer Poetry Award and won the 2017 Tel Adnan Poetry Prize, as awarded by the Radius of Arab American Writers and University of Arkansas Press. I'm so pleased to have them here together in conversation. And now Layla, Hala, and Jess.
Thank you. Thank you, Pierce. And I just want to say thank you to Brookline for hosting us, and to the Transnational Literature Series as well, and Jess and Hala, of course, for participating, and for all the attendees who are there watching us. I saw someone from Kuwait. Thank you for being here. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning back home, so I really appreciate it. So just to tell you a little bit about the novel, about Silence is a Sense, and then I'll do a short reading. The novel is about a young woman, a young Syrian refugee who flees her homeland when the Arab Spring uprisings there descend into civil war, and she makes her way across Europe before being resettled in an English city, which is where we meet her in the present day narrative. And she's been traumatized into muteness by her experiences, and so she spends her days basically watching her neighbors through the windows of the apartment complex that she lives in, and writing articles and pieces for an online magazine. And you know, she does this as she tries to cope and process her traumas. So I'm going to do a short reading. The part that I'm going to read comes from later in the novel, and it's a scene that the main character, the protagonist, revisits compulsively throughout the narrative. So it's a scene in which she participated in preparing for a protest with her friends back home and her love interest, Khalid. And there's kind of a core kernel of truth and trauma there that she can't quite pin down, or she can't quite articulate. And so she ends up revisiting this scene throughout the narrative. And in fact, this scene appears 3 times in the novel, but in 3 different iterations. So the first time it's kind of straight, but it's a bit surreal, and you can sense that something is a bit off. And then the second time, it's as if they're puppets in a theater. And then the third time is the one that I'm going to read now, and that's when the scene really kind of takes on a hellish or nightmarish bent to it. So the chapter is called The Eye. The cell is limned in red. Hazy, a fine metallic mist hangs in the air, latching itself to the tongue and sliding down a clenched throat. A blood-drop sun pulses in the sky. Its rays burn like acid, like gas, like the chemicals he swears he isn't using. Look around, everything is red. The aluminum desks, the white tiled floor, the yellow sponge spilling out of the cracks in the leather chairs, It is all bathed in a heavy maroon glow. No matter how hard I scrub, the window pane will not let in anything but red rays. This cell is bordered in ox blood, in burning embers, like a smoldering fire pit. The cell, the word, the concept looms large in our imagination. Room, house, prison, country, all of themselves. All these places where you are watched and heard and monitored. The only safe space is the one between your ears or in the grave. Usama and Amr have blood on their faces, and they labor over a fabric that matches. They move their markers over the cotton in silence. Nothing to hear but the scratch as the tip traverses the surface, painting it in heavy helmeted thugs with stern mouths and tanks crushed by flowers and birds soaring over water wheels. Death before humiliation, death before humiliation, death before humiliation is repeated 100 million times in 100 million ways. We are trying to tell you that there are worse things than dying. High in the corner, the eye watches us. Like every other time and in every other place, it watches us. The veins are more prominent today, bulging red veins that beat to a soundless rhythm. Back and forth, no brain behind to interpret what it sees. The huddle is gone this time. It's only Usama and Amr bent over the desks, me by the windows, and Khalid against the wall. His gaze moving between the eye, the painting of the fabric, and the dead world outside. He's in a beige jumpsuit, a white helmet dangling from his fingertips, and he looks more tired than there are words for. Do you know they call you a liar now, my love? A propagandist? A terrorist even? Terror. Terror is no longer the 1-2 explosion of barrel bombs or the pop of gunfire or the knock on the door. No, we have redefined it. Terror is the silence between explosions, the quiet before the knock on the door, before the bullet hits its target and you can breathe again because this time it wasn't you. We are breathing because outside the bombs have not stopped falling. We inhale one and exhale the other. It's like thunder behind the eyes, like 1,000 drums beating in your chest, like the walls of existence are collapsing all around you all at once. It is like no sound you've heard before. It's done, says Amr, straightening up and cracking his back. Usama concurs with a nod and answering crack of his neck. Yalla! We, the three of us, roll up the fabric until it's a thick scroll. We carry it to the open windows. I turned to ask Khalid to join us, but he's under the eye now, inspecting it, reaching up with hesitant hands to poke at it as though it might bite, and my breath catches in my lungs. Yalla, Usama says, prodding me to release my end of the fabric. We let go, and the cotton unfurls down the side of the building. It's met with silence, a silence so complete it seems to have swallowed the world. The banner flaps and slaps against the wall, dripping red and black onto the empty street below. The wind catches it, ripping the fabric from our hands and sending it flying over the buildings. The heavy thugs and tanks detach, inky blobs fall to the pavement without a sound. The flowers burst forth into color and the water wheels and birds go spinning and screaming into the sky. Behind us, there's a crash. Khalid is attacking the eye with his helmet. My heart stops as he hammers at it. Furious, desperate, it drowns out any and all other sounds. Bashing and bashing, he lets out short grunts and yips and what sound like whimpers until the eye cracks and splinters and is ripped from the ceiling to lie in a broken heap at his feet. He's sweaty, jaw locked in a grimace, panting like a feral animal, like the wolf they've turned him into. Is this victory or just another kind of death? Thank you.
That was really cool to hear you read, especially because that like sequence stuck out to me so much. And it's one of the many things that your book did like with memory that really like was new for me to read, and like showed me more than like it told me. Like in between, of course, the voiceless, like having her own like explanations for memory or like observations between languages and stuff. But yeah, so I thank you so much. My first question was that I noticed in your book and in Hala's book, there's a house and home setting, which was the nucleus of the story, where each character like in each of your books had that in common. Like in Hala's book, it was the Nasr family home, full of like, it's just like generations old. It's where all the family members convene. In your book, it's the apartment complex full of people like across generations, across contexts from different parts of the earth. And both places sites of like simultaneously like safety, but also violence. I'm wondering, how did having this grounding element affect your writing process? And also, how did it expand or challenge the definition of home for you, both like maybe the literal definition, but also like the like psychic definition, and also even just like as a writer, just like having this sort of like landing place for your speaker as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot to go with there. Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. A lot of it has to do with home and safety and security, and it's not just the home she left behind, it's the possible homes that she's made along the way, and then this community that she's now a part of in this strange English city, and the neighbors in her apartment complex kind of becomes a home as well. And I think that for the protagonist, safety is the primary concern and security is a primary concern, and how severely lacking she was in security and safety, both at home when the Civil War erupted, and then as a refugee making her way across Europe. She thinks that now she's here in this English city, she's finally safe. And at the start of the narrative, she keeps herself quite isolated and quite disconnected. And she is kind of a voyeur, where she just watches her neighbors through the windows, but she doesn't interact with them. And she's very resistant to the community that's there. And I think that serves a lot of functions for her. This idea of if she keeps herself in this flat, in this apartment, and she doesn't venture out. And even when she does venture out, she has these kind of rules and invisible boundaries that she set to try and convince herself that she's safe. But also, it works emotionally as well, where if she doesn't have connections with people, then, she won't feel that grief and that loss if they leave her, or if she no longer has them. And so that's kind of her position at the start of the narrative. But then as we go through and as she's trying to cope with her experiences, she finds herself kind of unwillingly at times drawn into the community and into what's happening and interacting with them and forming connections, intimate connections with these people, which, I think it just highlights that at the end of the day, humans are social animals, and we need people. And this community, she starts to become a part of this community whether she wants to or not.
Oh, something you were saying about safety that got me thinking was like, I noticed that something that I like that you do is that there's just like a collection of like artifacts in the in the book, like there are like her files, there are like random like journal entries, there's like her short story as well. And I even found myself thinking about like, okay, like I'm a writer, and sometimes even when I'm writing like in my own journal or whatever, like I can't help it, like I'm aware of an audience even though like there's no one there, like it's my head. And I was like, I noticed that sometimes like I got more information like from the artifacts than I got from the voiceless, from the protagonist.
Yeah.
And it made me like think like, oh, like there's even like she's even trying to keep herself safe from like the reader, like, or like the audience, and like it,
Yeah.
because like we're like reading the book, it like comes out that way too. Is that something that is like deliberate, or is that something that you found happening like as you were
Yeah.
like what is your more thoughts you have around that?
You know, that was deliberate. I did want the narrative to be conveyed using multiple forms and multiple styles. I didn't want you to just receive the story from her as a straight narration. And so I do use multiple forms in the novel, which convey information in specific ways and for specific purposes, as you say, you know, to specific audiences. So for example, there is an embedded short story that the protagonist writes, which her editor at the magazine then sees, like she sends it to her editor, and you get these emails, the email interactions between the protagonist and Josie, her editor. You see excerpts from the articles that she writes are also given. You see the journal entries, like you say, mental health evaluation, like medical reports. And so it really intentional. Reader should read information in this kind of multiple forms, a little bit chaotic. You know, the world we live in now, we're constantly bombarded by information, and we get it from so many different sources and in so many different forms through so many different media, that I really kind of wanted to replicate that sense of being bombarded with information in the novel itself. And I wanted to use that as a way to convey different parts of her story and different parts of her experiences.
Cool. Yeah, it definitely like, it was very, very interesting for like, because like the plot itself, like it was kind of like simmering, like almost like there was like a shark in the water and like waiting for it to come out. But like the form itself and like the unexpected like artifacts and things like that, like they were kind of like doing the like up and down, like the unexpected things that that I was expecting the plot to do. And then like as they fell away, like as like the big like conflict happened, it was just like, it was really cool. So thank you for talking more about that.
Thank you.
Hala, are you gonna read your excerpt?
Sure. I'm so sorry for the delay. How many minutes should I plan to read for?
I guess like Layla read for about 5.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay. I know exactly which section to read. So I guess to give some context, this is a very quick summary of the plot is that there's a woman in the 60s and 70s coming of age in Damascus who really wants to move to Hollywood and be a star, ends up moving to California, kind of ends up just sort of being an immigrant's wife, a homemaker, a mother, all very reluctantly, and has a lot of bitterment and resentment. And then the second part of the story is the family with the now adult children gather in present-day Beirut over a summer to try to stop their ancestral house from getting sold. And the youngest, who is 29, is named Najla, and she's a successful musician living in Beirut who has essentially put an ocean between her and her family. She is queer. She is quite successful in her field, and has a lot of ambivalence towards her family. And this is the first chapter we see her, and she has just found out that her family is coming this summer, which is her nightmare. When Nash gets off the phone with Mimi, she turns to the sleeping woman next to her, opens her mouth in a silent scream. It's time to go. She swings her legs from under the covers and holds her breath as she moves through the unfamiliar bedroom, the only light a nubby candle they had lit together a couple of hours ago. It's a one-bedroom, and Naj uses the glow from her cell screen as she makes her way down a short hallway to the bathroom. The overhead light is wincingly bright. Her parents are coming. Her sister is coming. Nash turns the faucet on and drinks straight from the tap, even though she knows the water is dirty. It makes her feel hardy and powerful to drink it anyway, like her body is made for this place. The sleeping woman is named Maggie, a co-worker of Naj's friend. The friend will be annoyed about her Irish exiting, but Naj needs to go somewhere she can think. Her mind well-versed in lying after nearly 30 years of secrets, girl crushes in middle school, doctored report cards, the decision to move to Beirut, churns expertly through pretexts, telling them that she would love to have them come, but she'll be on tour, or something about the bombing last week, or maybe even that she's going to America this summer, then waiting until they cancel to cancel her trip. She pees, the toilet seat cold to the touch. Her left forearm rests on her knee, the little red fox staring up at her with his pinprick eyes. Nash thinks of Maggie's lips parted in a moan, her teeth against Naj's nipple. Thanks for nothing, she whispers to the fox. She'd gotten the tattoo on New Year's Eve, adding to a collection of nearly a dozen. But this was the first one she'd gotten completely sober. She had watched every line of red fur, the way the needle curled the fox's tail into itself. What does it mean, the tattoo artist had asked, and Naj had quoted from The Little Prince. You become responsible forever for what you have tamed. The artist seemed impressed, so Naj left it at that. Not saying that when she'd read the line again, years after the first time, she'd thought not of an imaginary planet, but of unfamiliar bedrooms and the countless cigarettes she'd smoked listening to women cry and tell her that she was ruining their lives. While she tried to look understanding, while she tried to explain that it wasn't them, it was her, there was something wrong with her. The fox was a reminder that you, that is Naj, become responsible forever for what you have fucked. She got the tattoo thinking it would be a chaperone, a reminder not to pounce every time she saw a pretty face. But when you've just done a sold-out show in Byblos, the stage surrounded by Phoenician ruins as old as dirt, so that you feel like a conqueror staring out at the sea of dancing, screaming bodies, your violin bow moving like Zeus's lightning bolt, as though your arm is no longer your own, because it's not. It belongs to the crowd, to the music. When you're screaming your own words into a microphone and then suddenly standing in blackness because the electricity has been cut, because fuck it, it's Beirut, Naj had started screaming, and the audience echoed her words, magnifying them 1,000 times over. When the show is over and you're at the lip of the stage with your bandmate, a large neon pink sign blazing over your heads, a combination of your names bowing over and over again, the applause like the biggest love you'll ever know, all you'll want is a body to sign your name on. I think I'll stop there. I'll stop there.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I really, really loved your book, and like something that really struck me about it was like how non-linear it was, and like it's almost like time traveling like through like the sensory and through like everyone's different like contexts, and especially like I felt it like come together a lot like with Naj's queerness too, and how like queerness operates like outside of like obviously like of binary, like of like normativity. And I feel like you know, like even though like she was the only like queer character, there was a lot like the beautiful tenderness of queerness came through a lot, and like how like the observations other characters made and like how the story was told. And I don't know, that was like a huge thing for me. So thank you
so much. That means a lot to me.
So the first question that I had asked Layla was about how like in each of your books, like a house or home setting was the nucleus of the story. The place where like each different character had in common, like where they landed. So like in Layla's book, it was the apartment complex full of like people from like a bunch of different generations, like different backgrounds. And then like in your book, it was the Nasr family home, which is like generations old and also like packed with like different generations. And both places were sites of violence and safety. And I'm wondering, like, how did having this grounding element affect the writing process? And how did it like expand or challenge the definition of home for you, like maybe in the literal sense or the psychic sense?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I also just want to say that I'm such a fan of your work, Layla, and yours, obviously, Jess. And I'm going to rewatch this recording just to hear your answer to that question, because I'm curious how you answered it. So for me, I think the house, I think that it really actually challenged my notion of home, because I've been used to writing longer form prose that centers around what it doesn't exist concretely, right? So land that people, often because I write about Palestine, land that in short stories or in the novel or in poetry or whatever. So it's like land that people don't have access to, right? Or homes that have since disappeared, places that you cannot touch anymore. And so this was interesting because the center of this book, like you're saying, is a home that does exist, that has walls that you can step into. And yet what the family is hungry for, I think, throughout the book is for it's like nostalgia for a time. It's like being homesick for a time that doesn't exist anymore. It's being homesick for the people that used to inhabit the house, which really, I think, was an interesting thing to think about when I was writing, because I think, and this might be like the Palestinianism in me or whatever, but it's like I've gotten really used to thinking of kind of nostalgia or exile in terms of place and kind of being stapled to a place or being, disconnected or dislocated from a place. Whereas this got me thinking about like being dislocated from a time or from an era or from people, and how that can be just at like an exile that is just as intensely felt. So yeah, I mean, I think that was an interesting thing to think about in terms of the characters, because I think they're all really, they fight really hard throughout the book to keep this house in the family. But I think what they're really fighting for is it's more legacy based, it's more memory based than it is actually like present day, what this house actually entails or carries. So it got me thinking about a lot of those issues.
Cool. Thank you. So the second question I had was, so Sawana writers in diaspora have this constant voice in our heads that's almost like a shadow to every observation we make. It asks like, are you self-orientalizing? Are you orientalizing your own people? And like, even like Ava asks herself this question when she notices, like when she's watching a group of like Lebanese people in Beirut dancing. And the voiceless, her own inner voice is like always like alert and critical, often before the observation is made, but still like she notes like how nice it would be to have her hair flowing like Gibran intended. And so I found myself like, and that's, like that's a question I even ask myself when I'm writing. And like, I've definitely, I think, like, sometimes I have to be honest with myself and be like, I did orientalize myself, or I don't know, but it is like something that I come back to a lot. So I notice that a lot when I'm reading like other Sawana writers. But I found myself really moved by the rich, complicated interior worlds of each character, and like how their multitudes are like successfully honored. And I'm wondering, like, as you each wrote your books, were there any realizations or challenging moments you had that made way for lessons, like as you confronted that inner voice? And like, if not in like these specific works, maybe like overall in other works or in general, like as you move through the world, with your context, like where you're from and who you are?
It's a great question. Layla, do you want to go first? Because I can't think of an answer.
Yeah, sure.
But let me phrase it really graciously, right?
Not it my way, it's fine. I totally get what you're saying. And I think that this is, I get a little frustrated, to be honest, that we have to keep having these conversations. And I understand where the impulse comes from, you know, and I think that it's a natural kind of phase in any writer's journey, you know, that you're going to come up against these questions and this debate, and you know, realize that this is a conversation and a debate that's been going on for decades, and we're still, you know, I wish we could come to a point where we didn't have to automatically think of our writing as being in confrontation to the West. Like that's the first thing that anyone thinks of when they think of an Arab woman writing. It's automatically, is she self-orientalizing? Is she an advocate for her community? Is she betraying her community? And, you know, we constantly have to pivot to these different representational burdens, you know, and there's really no way of satisfying everyone. You know what I mean? Like if you're gonna say to a woman or to an Arab woman writer, you can't write about domestic abuse because that's orientalizing and it's just going to confirm Western expectations of barbaric Arab men, you're denying that woman the right to speak her truth. Right. And to speak of issues and problems that we continue to grapple with in our community. You know what I mean? So this constant framing, you know, as if, you know, the Western gaze is the only gaze that matters and it's the only thing we should be thinking about is, you know, I mean, I think that we need to move past that. And I think that it is through these multiplicities that this idea of a stereotype or a single story is countered. It's through these multiplicities. You know, it's not by all of us denying that some women are victimized by the men in their family, or by denying that some parts of our communities grapple with these very real problems. You know, that's not how we counter that single story. It's by allowing a spectrum and a multiplicity of stories to exist.
That's so beautifully said. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. Because it's like, it's just as pandery to the white gaze to like it's like, you know, when you clean the house before guests come over and you throw things under the bed, maybe it's just me, or like in the closet, but you're not actually clean. It's like just as pandery to be like, it's still, what are you still thinking about? You're still thinking about how your story or your representation of yourself or your community or people or whatever is going to be seen through that gaze, right? So I think in some ways, I think like the biggest act of resistance is to just like not participate in even like, but on an internal level, which is so much easier said than done, but like on an internal level to not participate in the like, how is this going to be seen, or how is this going to be, like, not go through that in your mind. I think it starts there. I think it's like that sort of like mental checking and like temperature taking is really the first step of like trying to dismantle that approach. But I feel like not being on, I find that not being involved in Twitter helps me a lot because I don't really know, like there's a lot of stuff that like I just don't know, and then that makes my life a lot easier, and then I'll hear things and be like, well, that sounds unpleasant. So I think there's a certain degree in which I am insulated from thinking too much about these things. The opinions from the outside world that I hear about oftentimes, and by outside world, I mean not my friends, writers that I respect, my family, right? So like this, the immediate circle, maybe the second circle, I hear back and forth a fair amount, but like, unless my publicist sends me something, I have blocked my Goodreads page and I have blocked my Amazon page because I have virtually no impulse control. So I actually don't look at that stuff, and I don't look at it intentionally because I think there's probably a higher percentage of users that use those spaces that are going to come from different backgrounds, that are going to, you know, have all sorts of opinions, and they might all be rave reviews, but I would rather prevent myself from reading rave reviews than start thinking, because again, I really think it starts in the mind. It's like an inside job. Like if I start to let that be part of how I assess what kind of stories I want to tell, or how I'm going to represent characters. I mean, I guess to bring it back to your question, Jess, I think one of the things that I have learned in writing, and in writing this book in particular, because there were more characters my age and in present day than in Salt Houses, is that I think to talk about this this being the multiplicity that you were talking about, Layla, of identity, truthfully, is to create characters that are grappling with these issues. Like if I'm going to write a character that ostensibly is raised in the States, but like moves back and forth between the Middle East, like that's going to be part of their experience. They are going to go to Lebanon or to wherever in the Middle East, and they're going to look at domestic workers, and they're going to have this sort of like an American privilege / awareness / guilt / all sorts of, like, that's just going to be part of the experience. And so I think I'm just, what I've learned is to write that doubt and question mark into the actual book. That's been the way that I've found like the most useful to deal with it, is like not to pretend it's not there, not to pretend that I figured it out, but rather like give the burden to my characters as well.
Yeah, so it's not about like worrying about like the outside world and the audience or whatever, but just like in the moment, like the same way like we catch ourselves like grappling with internalized misogyny, like, oh, this is like internalized Orientalism. Okay, I've noticed it, but I'm just going to keep writing against it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's all like, I think of it all as like inside jobs. I mean, I'm a psychologist, so that's part of the thing, but I do think a lot of it is like, it really is like, it's so easy to slip into that. And so I just kind of have to keep redirecting like my attention, like just like keep doing the thing you're doing, which is like try to write and try to tell these stories. And I mean, that's not to say I might someday write something that like people in my community might be like, this is egregious and wrong and inaccurate. And have you ever read a history book? Like I'm open to people correcting me or bringing my attention to things that I may not have been, that might have escaped my awareness. You know what I mean? Or I may not like been cognizant of, but that's I think different than, I don't know, than like constantly uploading that software, every new story or every new narrative.
Cool. Thank you. So my next question is, so your books each made room for the metaphysical pushing up against the trauma. The Voiceless had dream sequences and the recurring Malak al-Maut and the jinns as participants in the civil war outside her window. Mesna had a hypnotherapy session where Kit told her she astral traveled and she really communed with the dead, and she brought up like Reiki. And even Ava, who is the rational scientist, had this precise intuition that she noted and honored. And so, I don't know, like the Voiceless is a journalist. Layla, you're studying literary trauma theory. Hala, you are a clinical psychologist. Yet like we come from this shared regional culture where like mysticism is such a casual part of the day, even from like the dreams that we like talk about with each other to the coffee grounds to the superstitions, and like even just like honoring that intuition. And so like as a reader, I was aware of the metaphorical resonance of the subtle magics that you guys wrote into your books, into the work, but I also felt like this familiar, natural psychic wonder. Like it felt very like home to me, like as I was reading it. So I'm wondering, like, maybe you want to talk a little more about the metaphysical dimension to your work, whether it's a background character itself or its own device, or maybe you want to talk about dreams specifically, which like each of your books, like dreams were very important.
I can go for, I was laughing as you were asking me because I literally have this thing that's like this evil eye potion that I just got like literally on my desk that I had someone that I trust make me. So yeah, I mean, I believe that we all contain multitudes. It's a both and thing. You can be a scientist and also, I mean, I feel like I have enough room in my psyche for all of that stuff. I find so for me, dreams often play a big role in the stuff that I write. It's not the most inspired answer. It's because they play a big role in my life. And actually the inspiration for this book came from a dream where I dreamt Mesna. I dreamt the character of Mesna, and I dreamt all of these different things that Mesna was doing. And at the time it was sort of like, it felt like watching a movie, or it felt like I was this character, what's going on? I wrote it down and then revisited it after like a year and a half because I couldn't stop thinking about this character. So for me, I think that dreams are this like incredibly fascinating portal into And it depends on who you talk to. Some people are like, it's irrelevant. It's just digesting the last few days of your life. Some people are like, oh, it's intuition, it's prophetic, it's who knows. I land somewhere in between. Like, I don't think like if I have a dream, I'm going to necessarily change things drastically in my life to avoid, like the thing that comes up. But I do think that they point us to a certain extent in the direction of something that's trying to get our attention in our subconscious, right? Like there's something in our ecosystem that is asking for something, sometimes help, sometimes love, sometimes attention, sometimes to be less scared. And I think that when we're awake, we're all really defended, right? Like we all have a million things that we're doing. Anytime I feel uncomfortable, I reach for my phone like it's a pacifier, right? Like there's a lot of things that we can do to just like exist through life without ever really paying attention to those quiet, whispery, like dark corner parts of ourselves. And I think when you're sleeping, you don't have that machinery going all the time. So I think it allows you to get glimpses of parts of yourself that are like both more terrifying than you can imagine and also more expansive and abundant than you can imagine. And so I think it's, for me to write dreams into fiction is really exciting because it forces me to ask the question, what would this character dream? Which then forces me to ask the question, what's the subconscious of this character? And then I like have to get to know them better to think about what they would dream.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great answer, and I completely agree. I mean, I've always been fascinated by the mind and the way that the mind works, and I think that psychoanalysis, and dreams, it's a happy marriage, right? And I mean, and for my character in Silence is a Sense, I kind of conceived of her mind as a kind of trauma scape. Right. And so a lot of times it's about this tension between, is it a memory? Is it a hallucination? Is it a dream? Is it contamination from something else that's seeped into her mind and is revealing itself in a certain way, and I think that all of these things kind of shift and come together, and it really kind of forms a battleground in her mind. But at the same time, it's very revelatory, and it illuminates these kinds of latent fears and anxieties and that she's carried with her into the present day narrative, and she's trying to unpick them. A lot of the narrative, she doesn't trust her mind. She doesn't trust her mind's ability to make sense of these dreams and nightmares and memories. She can't trust the narrative that's bubbling up there, and so that really forms a lot of those dreams and memory episodes in the novel where she doesn't know what's real, the reader doesn't know what's real, and at the end of the day, the question is, does it really matter? What is real? What is that? How are you defining real? If it's impacting her and it's affecting her, is that real? That's real enough. So those are the questions that I was trying to wrestle with in the novel.
Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it. Yeah, ask someone in the middle of a panic attack if it's real.
Yeah,
it's like it's real to them.
Yeah, they think we're gonna die. Like this is happening.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I just want to ask Pierce or Ashley, how are we on time? Is it like time for Q&A or is it more questions or?
Let's do one more question and then we'll get to the audience questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Jess. These are incredible questions and this is so brilliant. We also have a really lovely chat going. So thank you, everyone.
So like reading these books side by side was very cool. And definitely makes me believe in like the even more into, I love the woo-woo stuff, and I'm just like, wow, like these writers, like I feel like we're supposed to be here like writing side by side, like and like I feel honored I get to be writing when they're writing, and all of us like informed by each other. And like especially with like how both of your books like talked about memory, like in the Arsonist City, like the book, like towards the end, the city wants him to remember, the city wants him to forget, and so he does both. And then in Silence is a Sense, that like I actually like stopped reading, was like, whoa, like what a line. It seems to me that complicit in the very idea of memory is the act of forgetting. And like memory and forgetting and like all these like really like big nebulous words that is so hard to like access, but like your books really just like were able to like crystallize like such truths about memory, like in really beautiful ways and in ways that like felt very true. And like there are a million truths around these topics, but like I just felt very like just like a bell, like a clear bell. And so I don't know, like I'm wondering like just like naming the countries that were present like in your books. There's so much trauma in Syria and Lebanon and Palestine and Swana countries and in their diasporas. And there's so much lost in the physical and the psychic, like the literal and ancestral archives. There's occupations happening right now and theft and corruption. Like even in Arsonist City, I mentioned, like I noticed toward the end, like you mentioned the Thauda and the port explosion. And like in Silence is a Sense, like you mentioned like the Manchester bombing. And I'm wondering, do you want to talk more about how like you accessed the work you did around memory in each of your books, and how you reached your remarkable distillations, especially like as the world continues to be like so much and like shit continues to happen? Like, is there ever that click that like, yes, like I've got it? Or like, is the acceptance of like the verisimilitude of it, like the, okay, like this is just true, like right now? I guess I'm wondering like what your like thoughts are about that. Like, how do you know that like you've done it? Like you've like reached that like itch, like when you're writing?
Oh, so you stayed on mute, Hala. So I thought.
I don't know. We're just like in the standoff. Yeah.
Do you want to go or?
Sure. Yeah, I can go. So, I mean, I would say this was a really complicated. So I wrote this arbitrarily to take place, or the present day to take place over summer of 2019, just like for fun. And of course, I finished writing before the summer of 2019 because I was like, what's going to actually happen in Lebanon in 2019? And then very soon after the summer, the Thauda started in Lebanon. And then a few months later, there was COVID. And then a few months later, there was the port explosion. And in between, there was the economic crisis, the hunger, all of those things that happened. So I felt like I was writing against the clock because I was like, it's like when you're finishing an exam and they're like taking the pencil out of your hand and the people taking the pencil is the publishing house. That was like, at some point you have to stop. Like at some point we need to like start like getting this ready to go. And more things kept happening. And it would just be like, I can't, if I'm going to have the flash forward scenes that you're referring to, just like, I need to be able to allude to a certain extent to some of these things because they're so enormous. And at some point I had to just be like, I don't know what I don't know. Like, I'm not going to, like, I don't know what's going to come next. And I spoke to the events that I didn't know had happened. So I don't think there was a click so much as a running out of time. It was just time to stop. But I felt like such a profound, and I'm not someone that ascribes that often to like, I think people will put it on you sometimes of like, you have to be the ambassador or the voice for an experience, but I'm not someone that like, I don't get too stressed out by that. I'm like, I know that I'm not, and I never said I was. And so just relax. But there was something about writing about a place and actual history and actual things that were like history. Speaking of memory, it was like a memory that I was remembering as it was happening. It was like history unfolding in the present, in the moment. And just, I had never felt that much responsibility to be able to capture something while it was happening and knowing that it was going to be incomplete by the time the book was in people's hands. So it felt much less like something clicked into place and more that I just kind of like left it kind of messy and half finished, which I guess is true to life and is true to is true to history and is true in engaging in history and frankly engaging in memory. I mean, I think that the passages that, especially Layla's passage is so true. I mean, like, it's like that piece of just, you kind of can't do one without the other. And I think that they're like, I am really fascinated with writing about characters that are like obsessed with remembering and obsessed with forgetting at the same time, which I think is kind of emblematic also of like the places that we're from, because those places are also sort of obsessed with forgetting and obsessed with remembering in different ways, you know, and the weight of remembering in those places is really heavy, and it comes at a very high cost, and yet it's like essential. So yeah, so those are some thoughts that I have.
Thank you.
Yeah, that, I mean, I can't even imagine how stressed out I would be writing about something that's actually ongoing. I started writing Silence is a Sense in 2017, and it's set in 2017, the present day narrative. So I didn't really face that issue, but you know, what you were talking about, Jess, in terms of the sheer multitude, you know, and I wrote this novel in 4 months. Like, the first draft of it, I wrote in 4 months. And it was really, because I mean, like Hala was saying, for like the last 10 years, it feels like we've been living as history is unfolding. You know, when the Arab Spring kicked off in late 2010, early 2011, I was living back home in Kuwait, and you could feel, you know, everywhere you went, you could feel this kind of shared emotion that something groundbreaking is happening. Like, our landscape, our region is not going to look the same anymore. Something really pivotal is happening. And that feeling for me continued, you know, for the subsequent years, as these different uprisings rose and fell and got more complicated, and, you know, in some cases descended into civil war. And then the refugee crisis happened. And it was just like one thing on top of another, you know, and then even all of these terrorist attacks that were happening in England or in Britain, in France, sorry, you know, it just felt like we were living in this massive watershed moment where our world as we know it is changing in fundamental ways and consequential ways that we're going to be living out for decades and decades, and perhaps even generations, you know what I mean? And so that multitude was kind of living in the back of my head. And then, you know, over the course of these 4 months or whatever it was in 2017, it all just kind of funneled its way into this one voice and into her story. And then this tension with memory came up, you know, memory and forgetting, because, you know, the process of retrieving memories is not as clear cut as people think it is. You know, memories are not files in a folder on a computer and you can just click at it and play it and there it is. Every time you call back a memory, you are reconstructing it. And in that reconstruction, you emphasize certain things, you drop other things that no longer suit your narrative, you focus on certain aspects, what someone said, but you neglect what was happening over there in the corner. You're recreating it. And so in that recreation, forgetting is happening and you're forgetting things. And then, you know, I'm always struck by memories of, well, is it really a memory, or is it just something that's been told to me so many times that I think it's a memory?
Yeah, that's a big one.
I've constructed it in my mind, but I don't actually remember it. Is it my memory, or is it just that I've been told so many times? You know, so this tension really cropped up for me with this protagonist and the way that she would deal with her memories from back home, and also, you know, on her journey as well.
Wow, thank you both so much. It was so cool to like get to read your books and then hang out with you guys.
Can I say, Jess, like, you're an amazing writer and I love your work, and it's an honor to have you be the person that like does this conversation.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to second that. Thank you, Jess. If anyone is curious, we have it on our shelf.
Yay,
it's glorious. We cannot recommend it enough. We cannot keep it on the shelves enough.
Yes.
You'll get a copy. Okay, we have some lovely questions. Let me jump in. We're going to go a little late, but I think that's okay. Okay. Both your characters have to grapple with various aspects of their trauma, mental health, unprocessed history, and loss. How did writing those stories aid you in dealing with your own experiences of the kind? It's a big one.
Do you want to go first? That's gonna never speak to me again. I'll go first. Okay. Oof. I mean, I think that there's a way that you can have characters do test runs of things before you do them yourself. And there's a way that you can fuse characters with traits that you wish you had. And that can be like courage. So like I write characters in some ways that are more courageous than me, or that are willing to try things or willing to radically change their lives in ways that I don't have the courage to do that. And there's something in doing it that allows me to get in touch with the part of myself that has that capacity, because you can't imagine something. This is going to get really like meditative, but it's like you can't imagine something without that thing existing within you, right? So it's like I can't if I'm creating a character that has courage, I had to create that, therefore that exists somewhere internally. And I think that that's something I think about a lot when I have like a character experience something that's really traumatic or difficult or whatever, and survive and come out through on the other end. It's like, well, you were able to conjure up that survival because there's some blueprint for it inside you, you know? And so there's something I think that can be really healing and cathartic about writing from that perspective. And I think honestly, sometimes when I'm writing characters, I'm thinking like, what would a person do if they've been traumatized? Oh, they'd probably do this. And then I'm writing, I'm like, God, this sounds really familiar. Oh, it's you. You're writing you. So it's like sometimes also you get like the wake up call in that way.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's really, that resonates a lot with how I think about writing as well, in terms of, you know, being able to live out these imaginary lives or these imaginary scenarios in your writing, and creating these characters who are, you know, who might be braver than you, or who might, you know, live out certain, you know, ideas that you are, that like you said, you can just kind of test drive it. But, you know, for me, it was important to maintain a critical distance between myself and the character, and myself and this narrative. And, you know, the weight of the material reality of what I was talking about weighed quite heavily on me. You know, the material reality, the actual lived experiences of these refugees, or of, you know, these Syrian citizens who've been forced to flee their homes, you know, and that lived reality was there in the back of my mind constantly. And it was something that I really had to struggle with in my writing, because when you write, you need to slip into your character and you need to slip under their skin, or else, you know, you can't hope to awaken anything in the reader if it's not stirring something in you. But at the same time, I think that there's a danger of sliding into over-identification or sliding into appropriation, which is even worse. So, you know, for me, it was important for me to kind of step away and be able to maintain some critical distance, to understand the ethical responsibility of trying to represent something which is a real lived experience for millions of people.
Thank you both of you. That's a question that comes up often in our series, with the focus on migration and refugee issues, that holding something that is so precious, and, you know, the responsibility of that and the way that weighs on an author. We have another one. Could you please both talk about writing identity? You are both artists in creating multiplicity and depth.
You know, I don't think about my characters in terms of what their identity markers are, and a huge struggle that the protagonist has in my novel is that, you know, she's left her homeland and she's arrived in this English city where these various identity markers are placed on her that she didn't necessarily think of as belonging to her when she was back home. Because when you're back home, You know, you don't think of yourself as an Arab woman or as a Muslim woman. Because everybody around you is Arab, everyone around you is Muslim. You don't, or you know, it doesn't factor into how you think about yourself necessarily. But suddenly she's thrust into the city, and all of these different identity markers are placed on her, and she's labeled in certain ways as a refugee, as a Muslim, as an Arab. So much so that the Muslim community in the city tries to claim her, and she's kind of resistant to that because she doesn't necessarily see herself in these different ways, you know, and I don't think that way when I write my characters. I don't think of them as having a certain identity profile and what that means. I think of them as people, you know, they are human beings with all of the, you know, contradictions, complexities, biases that people have, you know. So I don't find it helpful to necessarily think about identity when I'm writing. They're just people to me.
Yeah, I love that. I think I write very similarly. I think I would get really, like, I would freeze and kind of get immobilized if I thought about, like, well, this person's Syrian, but also they've lived here, and so you want to make sure you capture the complexity of this or that. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't write. I go in first. I mean, I first am just like curious about it. I love that you said they're human beings, because that's what I always say too. And I feel like some writers are like, this is a story. And I'm like, not to me. So yeah, I mean, I think I first start with like being really curious about a person, right? Like, and a person's sort of profile and like what it is, like, you know, Najla's in Beirut. Why would she go to Beirut? Why would she stay in Beirut? What made this girl that was raised in California do this thing? How does her queerness factor into that? Ah, interesting. Okay. And then she became a musician. Why? Like, it's more, I think for me, I can use the therapy background or the psychology background where it's just like the same way that you would ask questions of your clients to figure out like what got them there. And I think writers do that intuitively. They're doing that. They're doing client intakes without realizing it on their characters constantly. Yeah, so I think I agree. I think for me, it's less about writing identity and more about writing people that I'm really interested in. And yeah, it probably for the rest of my life, I'll be writing characters that have some sort of intersectionality in their identities, whatever, because those are the humans that I'm most interested in. Those are the people that tend to make up like my life and my friend group and my family and my whatever. So yeah, so I think that's probably why.
Thank you both. Okay, we have some writing questions specifically. Could you talk about your research prep processes before and during writing?
I can say, yeah, I mean, so for me, I do story. So for this book, I did storyboarding of the plot first. I tried to get a little bit of a sense of what the story was going to look like and did some storyboarding. And then the research, my first drafts are incomprehensible. My first draft is really just get it on the page, get the ideas on the page. And then a lot of times I'll be like write a paragraph and be like, how to figure out what happened this year in the Civil War. And then like, I'll keep writing the plot. And then sometimes what happens is I go back and figure out what happened during that year and go, well, you're an idiot. Now you have to change the plot because you should have just done that research before. But for me, it feels like it's more organic for me to write the actual like story first. And then I plug in, and usually I'm writing about things I know something about, right? Like I know something about the Civil War, I know something about these situations. But then later on, I usually go and plug in the research later.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, there's a quote by Terry Pratchett. He said that the first draft is you telling yourself the story. And I really think that that's how it happens most of the time. I mean, I don't storyboard or outline or anything. I usually just kind of get a voice in my head and I just write down whatever the voice is saying and I just go with it. And usually about 8,000 or 10,000 words in, I kind of have an idea of what's going on and what the story might end up being. And then usually after the first draft is done, that's when I'll kind of outline it and think, you know, well, I should have done more research here, or I should look into this more and kind of, you know, unpack it a little bit. But the first draft is just a messy, just get it on the page and see what's there, and then work on it.
This one is a little longer. I might summarize it briefly. And it is directed at Hala. Hala is an author that integrates the Palestinian experience and loss in your writing. And as a Palestinian American yourself, how does the writing of those experiences help you stay connected to that heritage? And what does that mean to you? Does it ever feel like a burden to have to give voices to that background?
I think it would feel like a burden if I think it would feel like a burden if I let myself believe that narrative, that there are only so many of us that can tell this story, and therefore we have to be the ambassadors of the story and we have to tell it exactly right. So I think if I tap into that, I get very anxious and freaked out, and then feel like the weight of that and feel like I'm going to mess it up and whatever. I try to stay away from that thinking, even when it is presented to me. So even if a review will say something like that, or if somebody will reach out to me and say something like that, I try to like nod and thank you, and then kind of like go back to what I'm doing, which is my job is just to write, right? Like my job is just to tell stories that I'm interested in, that captivate me, and Palestine interests me and it captivates me, and I don't. So it's interesting because I don't feel a responsibility to tell stories about Palestine. I feel an inclination to, and I feel driven to. What will happen if the day comes when I no longer feel that desire, but maybe feel some sort of responsibility to? I don't know. I'm not there. Like, but it could. I can conceive of a world in which, you know what I mean. You're kind of like, well, I've been writing these stories and I've been telling, and I've been trying to give voice to these experiences and whatever, as far as I understand them. But now I want to do something completely different. But like, also maybe there's a readership there. Maybe this is important for like, you know, a 13-year-old like Arab girl like reading the story. Like, so I have not been at that. I have not found that tension point yet. I hope I don't. So it's hard to know what I would do. But I think for now there seems to be a really nice matching up of like desire of what stories to tell, and then like the receptivity of like community, and like community being like, wow, these stories are useful for some folks. So I don't resent it. I don't resent it, and I don't feel a burden. And that's mostly because I stay away from that kind of thinking. I don't think of myself as any sort of representative for anything, right? Like I come up with characters and I tell these stories, and if I do them well, I do them well. And if I don't, that's okay. There's other books. Like I try to have a relatively, I try to practice non-attachment in the Buddhist sense with writing as much as I possibly can. And it's probably the area of my life that I do it the most successfully, actually, ironically. So I think I actually like do a decent job of just being like, I've done the thing, it's out in the world. I've never reread a book I've written. I've never, like, it's like when I'm done with a thing, I'm done with it, not in any sort of negative way, but it's just like, thank you for spending this time with me. I'm going to miss this family now for the next 2 years. And now I'm going to try to think of what else I can create. So that's sort of how I think of it.
What I think is really interesting about, I haven't read your new one yet, but from Salt Houses is, you know, how you give so many different experiences and so many different perspectives that, you know, and I think that that's something that's kind of shared across a lot of Palestinian writers that yeah. I've read. Yeah. You know, this idea of bringing in multiple generations, multiple perspectives, you know, children who were raised in the diaspora, yes. You know, immigrant children, or back home, or, you know, in Kuwait, you know, and all of these different experiences can kind of touch on many people's representations that they would like to see. You know what I mean? Like you're covering a lot of bases. It's not just one singular experience that you're showing in the narrative.
And it's interesting because there's a way that could be really premeditated. You know what I mean? Like where it's like, I'm going to cast a wide net and I'm going to catch a wide net. But I think it has to do with well, first of all, I think a lot of people from our background grew up in intergenerational homes, right? So yeah. I spent a lot of time with grandparents and with people that were much younger than me, people that are much older, people that are much younger. In the West, there's a little bit more of a disconnect, right? So usually the people you reside with are people your age or your immediate children, and that's kind of it. So I think I also spent from childhood, grew up with a bunch of different people, different generations, aunts, uncles, etc. And because I was an imaginative kid, like a lot of people are, was like, what is my aunt thinking right now? What did my grandma want when she was 10? What did whatever, so I think that like curiosity spread to everyone around me. And so when it came time to tell the story, I mean, I'm trying to write a novel now, Layla, that has just a protagonist. Person. I freaked out. I like wrote 200 pages and changed it to third person. I just like have a really hard time staying with one character, which I think
One
is
perspective. Yeah. Wow.
Just want to read one comment from the chat. Shireen says, I can assure you it is very important to a reader that is of a Palestinian origin, at least from my personal experience, because it helps me connect to something that I feel otherwise deprived of or disconnected from. Thank you, Shireen.
That means a lot. Yeah, I mean, that's like, it means more than I can ever put language to. I like start talking like it means more than I can put language to, that is something that has value for people and that people resonate with that. And I also can't I can't have that, I can't be thinking about that while I'm writing, or else I will never write a story, because I'll feel like I'm never doing it justice. I'm never capturing it enough. I'm not capturing the complexity enough. So it's sort of like sitting in that in-between place of like the fact that my stories are sometimes received that way means the world to me. Yeah.
So let's do a lightning round. I've got 2 last questions for both of you. Can you both name 1 or 2 writers whose craft and stories influence you? And the second, can you talk about what you're working on next?
My writer is Jhumpa Lahiri, who has a book coming out, which I'm so excited about. Did I take it? I'm sorry.
Love her.
I have to interrupt here then to just tell everyone that we have Jhumpa coming May 11th.
Yes.
We'll be in conversation with Yi Yun Lee. Ashley, I'm sure you'll put the link in the chat. So sorry, I did mention that.
Of dreams.
We are thrilled.
So excited. Oh my God, I'm so excited about this. I would say Jhumpa Lahiri, and then what are we working on?
Yeah.
So the novel that I recently changed to third person because I couldn't handle first person, and then some nonfiction. I had a cultural memoir that sold recently that's going to be about like erasure and how erasure manifests in different places in our lives.
I mean, I'm going to go in with you on Jhumpa Lahiri because The Namesake is the novel that made me want to be an author. So I mean, like she's up there. I did have Ghada Samman, the Syrian writer, in the back of my head when I was writing Silence is a Sense. I love her kind of surreal, supernatural style. And she has very precise prose that I love, in Arabic, at least. I haven't read her in translation. As to what I'm working on now, I'm halfway through a PhD, so that's what I'm working on, is writing the thesis. I've kind of parked the creative writing for a little bit. I'm tinkering around with short stories and stuff, but most of my energy is going towards the thesis at the moment, which I have to say, in case my supervisor is lurking in the background, sometimes she is.
يعطيك العافية.
Allah يعافيك, مشكورة.
And Jess, can you come back on screen? I'd love to hear if you're working on something, Jess, whatever you have to push next.
Oh, hello. I've actually been recording in my dream journal more than I've been like writing any linear thing, but I did get like an idea for a book, and I'm like, do you want to be a script or do you want to be a novel? So I'm like at the point in the process where I'm trying to figure out like the form, but definitely feel very inspired after like living in the world of these books for a while, because I've been avoiding fiction for the past couple of years just because like I didn't have the focus. I just kept like putting books down and not finishing them, but I feel like the spell has broken, so I'm very excited about that.
Thank you. I'm very excited for that, however that form is, whatever form it ends up being. Lovely. Okay, we had a question in the chat and that's been answered. Lovely. So I'm just going to say thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for staying a little later. Thank you all. It's been a lovely, lovely, brilliant, powerful conversation. Someone in the chat called it precious time, and I have felt that too. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you
for joining. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Layla.
Thank you. Thanks, Hala. Thanks, Jess.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone at Brookline. Thank you.
Thanks so much.